The glow from the table candle danced across my old leather purse just as my niece's husband's card got declined. Still tracing the worn strap, the same one they'd mocked minutes earlier, I let their silence grow loud. As the scent of their untouched crème brûlée turned bitter in the air, no one dared look at me. While they fumbled for excuses, I remembered the photo he'd taken under the table, like I wouldn't notice. That's when I pulled out the card from my outdated bag and paid for the dinner they couldn't afford. The same purse they laughed at bought the night they'll never forget and will never repeat. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Charleston's dusk rolled in soft and honeyed, the kind of southern evening that seemed painted in gold. Judith Hayes stepped out of her parked sedan, smoothing the linen of her pale blue blouse. She wasn't one for embellishment, never had been, but the tiny pearl pin at her collar gleamed under the restaurant's awning lights like a quiet declaration of taste. In her hand, as always, hung her weathered brown leather purse. The strap had been replaced twice, the zipper once, and the corners were darkened from years of being set down on real wooden floors and not marble ones. It was the kind of purse that carried history, old receipts, keys that no longer opened anything, and a life well lived. Inside the candlelit restaurant, a hostess greeted her with a warm, "Good evening, Ms. Hayes," and Judith returned it with her practiced smile. She scanned the room, a mosaic of laughter, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses. Then she spotted them. Emily waved, the motion just a little too sharp, like she wanted everyone to notice she knew someone older and humbler. Judith moved toward the table, her steps slow but sure, her purse tucked close to her side. Emily, ever the hostess in her own mind, beamed. "Aunt Judith, we got the best table. They said it's one of their VIP ones." Naomi leaned closer to Emily, her voice dripping sugar and venom. "That bag could vote," she whispered, her manicured hand fluttering over her lips in mock discretion. Tanner's quiet chuckle followed. He angled his phone beneath the table, the faint click of a photo sounding louder than it should have. He wasn't subtle. He didn't need to be. They thought she wouldn't notice. But Judith did. She heard the whisper. She saw the flash reflected in the polished silverware, and she smiled, softly, almost tenderly, as if they'd reminded her of a private joke she'd been waiting years to tell. "Evening all," she said, her voice light as chiffon. "You look lovely, Emily. Charleston agrees with you." Emily's smile faltered for half a heartbeat before she recovered. "Oh, thank you. Tanner and I are trying to keep up appearances. You know how it is." Judith's eyes flicked over her niece's shimmering dress, label names stamped near the hem like a quiet advertisement, and she nodded. "Appearances do take work." The waiter approached then, tall, crisp uniform, posture practiced. But instead of addressing Emily or Tanner, he smiled directly at Judith. "Nice to see you, Ms. H. Ms. May mentioned you might be stopping by tonight." Judith's smile deepened, a glimmer of something unreadable passing through her eyes. "I wouldn't miss it." Emily blinked. "Wait, Ms. May, you know the owner?" "Oh, a little," Judith replied, folding her napkin onto her lap. "We go way back." The waiter poured water for everyone, his tone respectful in a way that didn't fit the story Emily liked to tell about her humble aunt. Tanner cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. "So," he said brightly, "how's retirement treating you? Must be nice having all that free time." "Emily says you've still got that same old purse from the 90s. Judith looked at the purse resting beside her chair. "I have. It's been through a lot with me." She traced the leather seam with her fingertips. "Things with history usually have more to say than the things that shine." Naomi laughed lightly, taking a sip of her rosé. "That's poetic," she said, "and a little tragic." Judith didn't answer. She simply lifted her gaze to the chandelier above, the crystal drops catching the light like frozen rain. The waiter returned with menus. Emily's eyes widened as she flipped through them, each page a testament to prices meant for a different crowd. "Oh," she murmured, trying to sound casual. "These entrees are ambitious." Naomi giggled behind her hand. "It's Charleston, darling. You pay for the atmosphere." Judith folded her menu shut without glancing twice. "Sometimes you pay for more than that." Her tone was calm, but it landed with weight. Tanner looked up, sensing something unspoken there. Judith's smile didn't move. A silence stretched, elegant and uncomfortable. From the corner of her eye, Judith caught the waiter glancing her way again, almost a bow, almost reverence. She reached for her wine glass, her hand steady, and the old leather purse sat quietly by her side, its surface catching the glow of candlelight. "Shall we toast?" she asked, raising her glass. Emily nodded, uncertain. "To family?" Judith's eyes held hers, cool, kind, and unreadable. "To remembering what lasts." Glasses clinked. The sound lingered longer than it should have. Outside, the last of the evening light faded across the cobblestones, leaving only the warm hum of the restaurant and the quiet rustle of that old purse as Judith reached into it, for something no one at the table yet deserved to see. The first course arrived in a shimmer of candlelight, tiny porcelain bowls carrying bisque as smooth as silk. The scent of butter and roasted crab wafted through the air, soft and indulgent. Judith lifted her spoon delicately, but she wasn't tasting the soup. She was watching them. Emily's smile had begun to stiffen around the edges. The effort of keeping up appearances always cracked somewhere. Judith had seen it in her niece since she was a girl. Back then, it was when her toy dress-up jewelry broke. Now, it was when the menu had too many zeros. "So," Emily said brightly, stirring her soup as if she planned to finish it. "We're doing some minor redecorating at home. You know, the market's crazy right now, and we're in a bit of a transition." Naomi dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Tight quarters, huh?" she said, the tone sugary but edged. "I could never. My new rooftop condo? Pure serenity. Views of the harbor, personal elevator access, private wine fridge. Heaven." Judith glanced up, just long enough to meet Naomi's eyes. "Leased or owned?" she asked mildly. Naomi blinked, the smile freezing mid-sip. "Well, technically leased, but that's the trend now, you know? Flexibility." Tanner laughed, low and smooth, leaning back in his chair as if he were already the wealthiest man in the room. "We're looking into some new investments," he said. "Big returns coming. Just a matter of timing." Judith tilted her head. "Oh? Which sector?" "Fintech," he said confidently. "A company called LendPath. Huge in the digital lending space." Judith's hand stilled on her spoon. LendPath. She knew that name. She'd read the quarterly filings 2 weeks ago. It wasn't just failing, it was imploding. Shareholder lawsuits, executive exits, and a stock chart that had looked like a cliff. "Sounds promising," she murmured, her tone unreadable. Across the table, Emily laughed a little too hard. "Tanner's always been the smart one with money. I'm just trying to keep up." Judith smiled softly. "I'm sure you are." A flicker of discomfort crossed Emily's face before she looked away, focusing instead on Naomi, who was already complaining about the wine temperature. The illusion of social ease was cracking, hairline fractures in their curated glamour. The waiter reappeared with the entree menus. "Would you like to begin a tab, Mr. Rhodes?" Tanner nodded, reaching into his sleek leather wallet with a flash of gold card. Judith noticed the faint tremor in his hand, so small, so controlled, but not invisible. Minutes passed, conversation stretching thin. Judith spoke little, only enough to keep the rhythm of civility alive. Emily talked about branding partnerships, Naomi about visibility, Tanner about equity opportunities. None of them spoke about reality. Then the waiter returned. He bent slightly, voice courteous but hushed. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card didn't go through. Would you like to try a different one?" Naomi's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Emily went still, her cheeks coloring. Tanner gave a short laugh, strained and brittle. "That's odd. Must be the chip reader. Happens all the time. Let me just—" He fished out another card. Judith could almost hear the static of panic behind his polished smile. He tapped it against the machine with a little too much force. The waiter waited. The screen beeped again. Declined. Tanner's jaw flexed. "That's strange. I'll just, Venmo someone. Easy fix." "Of course," the waiter said gently, though his eyes flicked toward Judith for the briefest moment, as if confirming something unspoken. Judith leaned back, watching Tanner's composure unravel thread by thread. Emily adjusted her napkin, pretending to check her phone, whispering something that sounded like limits. Naomi glanced between them, caught between pity and amusement. Judith reached for her wine. The glass was cool against her fingers, the taste full-bodied and dry, grounding her in the slow rhythm of satisfaction. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply saw. All the masks, all the noise, all of it slipping away under the soft music and flickering light. The kind of truth that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "You all right, dear?" Judith asked lightly, eyes on Tanner. He forced a grin. "Perfectly. Just some tech issue." "Of course," she said. "Technology can be so unreliable." The waiter offered to try again, and Tanner waved him off too quickly. No, I'll handle it. Maybe after dessert." Judith smiled, the faintest curve of her lips. "I'm sure you will." She sipped her wine again, slow and deliberate, the sound of crystal meeting her ring echoing faintly through the momentary silence. From the far end of the room, the pianist shifted songs, something older now, elegant and patient. Judith glanced toward the melody, then back at the table where the fragile illusion of wealth was already cracking beneath candlelight. And somewhere beneath that hum of embarrassment and pretense, she felt something settle inside her, like the first, quiet tightening of a knot. Because debts had a way of surfacing, and this one had just begun to show. The tension had turned invisible, woven into the hum of the restaurant like a thread no one dared tug. Conversation limped forward, brittle and hollow. Judith let it stretch just long enough to make them squirm before setting her wineglass down, the sound crisp against the linen-draped table. "Dessert menus?" the waiter asked, his tone neutral but his eyes flickering, just once, to Judith. Tanner opened his mouth, but Judith was already reaching for her purse. The leather gave a soft sigh as she unfastened the worn clasp. The motion was unhurried, practiced, a gesture of habit, not performance. She didn't say a word, just slid a sleek black card toward the server with 2 fingers, quiet as a secret. The waiter's nod was small, but reverent. He took it and disappeared toward the back. Emily's eyes widened. "Oh, Aunt Judith, no! You don't have to—" "Too late," Judith said simply without even looking up from her napkin. The air shifted. Naomi let out a half laugh, the kind people make when they don't know which side of a moment to stand on. "Well, that's unexpected." Judith lifted her gaze then, and the softness in it wasn't apology. "No trouble," she said. "This place is special to me." It was such an ordinary sentence, but the calm weight in her tone made it sound like something more. A line drawn in quiet ink. Emily tried to recover the rhythm of things, forcing brightness back into her voice. "That's so sweet of you, really. You've always been generous. Judith smiled faintly. Only when it counts. The waiter returned a moment later, not with hesitation, not with the awkward sympathy he'd worn for Tanner, but with a kind of professional deference that didn't go unnoticed. He placed the check presenter discreetly beside Judith. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes. It's always an honor." Emily blinked at the phrasing. Tanner looked up sharply, his brow tightening. Judith tucked the card away with graceful precision. "You're very kind, Ryan. Please extend my regards to Ms. May." "Of course," the waiter said, voice low, almost deferential. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence that hummed louder than any music. Tanner shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the purse, then, unable to help himself, to the card as Judith slid it back into its leather sleeve. The logo had glimmered just long enough under the candlelight for him to recognize it, obsidian black with a silver crest. He knew that card. The kind whispered about in financial forums, the kind without a limit, without a ceiling, without questions, the kind people like him could only dream of qualifying for. His throat tightened. "That's quite a card," he said, trying to sound casual. Judith dabbed her lips with her napkin. "It does its job." Emily's voice came out too high, too quick. "Did you, win the lottery or something?" Judith looked at her niece then. Really looked. Emily's expensive curls, her gleaming earrings, her posture just a little too rigid. There was a flicker of something almost tender in Judith's eyes before it vanished. "I suppose you could say luck runs in the family," she said, her tone smooth but layered with meaning Emily couldn't parse. Naomi leaned back, studying her as though trying to see what she'd missed. "Well," she said lightly, "it's nice someone at the table can pay the bill." Tanner's jaw twitched, but he stayed silent. The confidence that once filled his shoulders had drained away, leaving only the shell of the man who built his worth on optics. Judith glanced around the restaurant, the glint of chandeliers, the low murmur of laughter, the gentle hiss of wine being poured somewhere nearby. It was all familiar to her, but not in the way they thought. This wasn't luxury to her. It was memory. Legacy. When she turned back to her companions, her smile was serene. "You know," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry across the linen and crystal, "I've always liked this place. It feels honest." Emily's laugh faltered. "Honest?" "Yes," Judith said softly. "People reveal themselves here, usually by dessert." For a beat, no one spoke. Then the waiter returned with a silver tray, setting down 3 small gift boxes wrapped in ivory ribbon, complimentary, from Ms. May's kitchen. "A token of appreciation," he said, glancing at Judith again. Tanner's eyes flicked between Judith and the boxes. "We didn't, order these." "No," Judith replied. "They're earned." Naomi's painted smile wavered. Emily reached for one of the boxes, her fingers trembling just slightly. Judith lifted her wineglass again, the candlelight tracing a golden line along its rim. "Two appearances," she said softly, raising it in a solitary toast. "They're so fragile, aren't they?" No one answered. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, soft and steady against the windows. Judith looked toward it, her reflection ghosted in the glass, calm, deliberate, unshaken. The purse sat beside her, unassuming, familiar. Within it, a lifetime's worth of proof waited, patient and powerful. As the others shifted uneasily in their seats, Judith smiled to herself, a knowing curve of quiet triumph. The storm outside might have been gentle, but the one she'd just stirred, that one would leave marks. The hum of the dining room dimmed as Judith rose from her seat. Her movements were calm, no rush, no apology, as if she'd simply remembered something she'd left undone. Emily glanced up, startled. "Aunt Judith, Where are you going? Judith smoothed her blouse, her expression serene. Just saying hello to an old friend, she said. The purse hung at her elbow, that same weathered brown leather catching the faint glow of candlelight. She crossed the marble floor, each step deliberate, as the waiter quietly slipped through a side door and held it open for her. Behind the kitchen doors, the air changed. It was warmer, heavier with the scent of truffle butter, seared meat, and something sweeter, molasses and memory. The clatter of dishes softened as heads turned. A few of the older staff nodded to her in recognition. Then from the far corner came a voice, smoky and soft. Lord, I knew that walk anywhere. Judith turned, and there she was. Ms. May stood near the pass, tall even at 87, her hair the color of winter steel, her posture regal in a simple black dress and white apron. Her sharp eyes softened as she wiped her hands on a linen towel. Still gliding through like you own the place, she said, smiling. Judith returned the smile. In a manner of speaking. They embraced. A real one, not the polite half-contact of social gatherings. The years folded in on themselves for a heartbeat. And Judith felt the same comfort she'd felt 30 years ago when she'd been a young archivist fresh from college, working nights here to make ends meet. I can't believe it's been that long, Ms. May murmured. 30 years since you were shelving wine and arguing with me about the difference between mahogany and cherry wood. Judith laughed quietly. You were wrong then. I was never wrong, Ms. May said, eyes twinkling. Just less right. They both laughed, the easy, unguarded kind that carried decades of trust. Ms. May tilted her head toward the purse. Still have that old thing? Judith brushed a hand over it. Always. Some things age better than people give them credit for. That purse has seen everything, Ms. May said. Deals, heartbreaks, half this city's secrets. You take care of it. It takes care of you. Judith's smile dimmed slightly, the warmth fading into thought. Speaking of secrets, she said, lowering her voice. One of those guests at my table, Tanner, snapped a photo. Of the purse. Thought I didn't notice. Ms. May's eyes sharpened, steel behind the kindness. He took a photo. Judith nodded. Under the table. Emily saw it. Naomi laughed. I think they meant it as a joke. But I'm done letting people like that make the rules about respect. Ms. May folded her arms, lips pressing thin. You want me to handle it? No, Judith said softly. Not yet. But it's time to tighten who we let in. Too many people treat this place like a stage. Ms. May's expression softened again, though the edge never left her tone. I'll update the list. Quietly. Good, Judith said. Discretion, as always. The older woman reached out, touching Judith's arm. You sure you're ready to stir things again? Judith looked past her, through the narrow glass window in the swinging door. From here she could see Emily's impatient posture, Tanner pretending to scroll on his phone, Naomi whispering something with a smug little smile. Her answer was steady. They've stirred enough. It's time they learned what still waters really look like. Ms. May gave a knowing nod. Then we'll start tonight. Judith smiled, small, satisfied, and impossibly calm. Thank you, May. You don't thank family, Ms. May said simply. You just come home when it's time. Judith lingered there a moment longer, the soft kitchen light catching her profile, the grace of a woman who knew exactly when to act and when to wait. Then she turned, pushing through the swinging door with a quiet resolve. Back in the dining room, laughter clattered from another table, brittle and hollow compared to the grounded hush that seemed to follow Judith back to her seat. Naomi frowned. What's taking her so long? Emily sighed, checking her phone for the third time. Probably chatting with the waiter again. She does that, Tanner muttered. She's milking it. Loves the attention. But as Judith approached, their voices faltered. There was something in her expression, something that had settled there in the space between memory and intent. She sat down, calm as still water, her purse returning to its place beside her chair. The waiter passed behind her then, carrying a folded piece of paper toward the manager's office, one that bore Tanner's name and the faint outline of a confiscated photo on the screen of a phone. Judith didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her smile was already enough to make the air at the table change again, soft, deliberate, and sharp as a closing door. The low murmur of the restaurant had shifted since Judith left. The trio at her table hadn't noticed it yet. The subtle quiet that rippled through the staff, the way the maitre d's eyes occasionally flicked toward them with polite disinterest instead of professional warmth. When Judith returned, her expression carried that same unflappable serenity, but there was something else behind it now, a composure sharpened by decision. She lowered herself gracefully into her chair, smoothing her napkin over her lap. "Everything's handled," she said. Her tone was light, but the words felt heavier than they should have. Naomi let out a little laugh, twirling her wineglass by the stem. "You mean your secret kitchen handshake? You and your old friend back there?" Judith's smile was mild. "Something like that." Naomi leaned forward, her voice playful but edged. "It's so cute. Your whole humble chic thing. I swear, if I had your confidence, I'd never buy another purse again." Emily forced a laugh to join hers, but it came out too brittle. "Naomi," she hissed, "stop." But Naomi didn't stop. She never knew when to. "No, really, it's inspiring. Authenticity is trending, you know?" Judith looked at her calmly. "Yes, but authenticity can't be bought. That's the part most people miss." Naomi blinked, not sure if it was an insult. Before the moment could stretch further, the waiter returned. Ryan again, posture upright, eyes steady. He carried a silver tray balanced with 4 elegant white boxes, each tied with satin ribbon. He placed them with practiced precision, one by one, the delicate scent of paper and vanilla following his motion. "Compliments of Ms. May," he said, nodding toward Judith. Naomi's curiosity lit up. "Gifts? Well, this night just got interesting." She reached eagerly toward a box, only for Ryan to pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said with quiet professionalism. "These are for Ms. Hayes's confirmed guests." A tiny silence fell. Naomi frowned. "Excuse me?" Ryan turned slightly, setting a box in front of the man seated behind them, someone from another party entirely, and then placed the remaining 3 in front of Judith and 2 other women seated at a nearby table. Not a single one stopped at Naomi's, Emily's, or Tanner's places. Judith's hand brushed the edge of her own box. "Thank you, Ryan." "Of course, Ms. Hayes." He bowed slightly and disappeared toward the kitchen, leaving behind a silence so tight it could have snapped. Emily's cheeks flushed a quick, startled pink. Was there some sort of mistake? Judith turned her box slowly, running her fingers over the ribbon. "No mistake. These are invitations." Tanner leaned forward. "Invitations?" Judith's smile never faltered. "To the Heritage Club, one of Charleston's oldest dinner circles. They're hosting an event next month for patrons of local legacy businesses. Ms. May and I decided to sponsor new memberships." Emily blinked. "You did?" Judith nodded. "For those who understand what it means to preserve history, not just perform it." The sentence hovered, gentle, yet surgical. Naomi's smile stiffened. "That's lovely. So exclusive, I'm sure." Judith turned her gaze to her, eyes bright but unreadable. "Exclusivity isn't about who gets in, dear. It's about who's quietly asked not to return." Naomi froze, wineglass halfway to her lips. Emily looked at her aunt, trying to read her. What does that mean? Judith folded her hands together, elbows resting lightly on the tablecloth. The candlelight played across the soft lines of her face. It means that some guests are permanent, she said gently, and others. She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to draw the line invisible but unmistakable. We're temporary. Emily's breath caught. Aunt Judith. Judith stood, slowly, gracefully. The motion drew every eye around the table without a word of force behind it. Don't worry, she said, reaching for her purse. Everything's been taken care of. You won't have to pay for dinner tonight. Or ever again. At least not here. Naomi blinked. What are you saying? Judith met her eyes with quiet finality. I'm saying you're no longer welcome at my table. Her voice didn't rise, yet the sentence landed like a gavel. The waiter reappeared at her shoulder as if on cue. Ms. Hayes, he murmured. Ms. May said the list has been updated. Judith nodded, her gaze never leaving the three stunned faces before her. Thank you, Ryan. Emily's face had gone pale. You changed the list? Judith adjusted the strap of her purse, her composure absolute. I did. I told you this place was special to me. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm outside had gathered strength, rain streaking down the windows like melted glass. The restaurant's soft music went on, indifferent. Judith turned toward the window, her reflection framed in light and motion, a woman carved from calm and consequence. Funny thing about tables, she said at last, they remember who's earned a seat. Then she walked toward the maitre d', exchanging a quiet word as she passed. Behind her, Emily sat frozen, Tanner's hand gripping his untouched glass, Naomi staring after her with a confusion that tasted like humiliation. And when Judith reached the doorway, Ms. May was there, watching from the shadows, ledger in hand. Judith gave her the faintest nod. Ms. May closed the book. By the time the rain eased, Charleston's streets shimmered like polished slate. Inside the restaurant, the last notes of piano faded into low conversation and the delicate chime of glassware. Judith's table sat half empty now. Tanner, Emily, and Naomi still frozen in the quiet wreckage she'd left behind. Naomi was the first to move. She inhaled sharply, reaching for her phone like a lifeline. Okay, she said, her tone tight. Let's just not make this bigger than it is. Emily blinked out of her trance. What are you doing? Naomi swiped through her camera roll. Posting. Damage control. The glow of her screen lit her face, softening the fury into vanity. She raised her phone, angling for the perfect shot. Wine glasses, the half-eaten dessert, the glow of chandeliers still flickering above. Smile, she said flatly. Emily didn't move. Tanner just stared at the rain-streaked window, jaw tight. Naomi took the photo anyway. Within seconds, she was typing. Hatcher Charleston evenings, our dinner goals, bitch, grateful, and then she hit post with a defiant flick of her thumb. For a few moments, it worked. The screen blinked, loaded, and displayed her carefully curated image. She smirked. See? Nothing to worry, The notification popped up before she could finish. Post removed. This content has been flagged for unauthorized use of location tags. Naomi frowned. What the hell? She refreshed. The image was gone. Another notification followed, this time an email. May's restaurant group enforces a private dining image policy. Repeat violations may result in service denial. Her mouth fell open. They banned me? Emily's stomach dropped. You're kidding. Naomi turned her screen around, her voice a whisper now. It says influencer content requires prior approval. They blacklisted me. Tanner's laugh came out low and bitter. Guess authenticity really is trending. Emily shot him a glare but didn't argue. Instead, She grabbed her own phone and opened Instagram, thumb trembling as she typed out a new caption. "Family night out," she wrote, adding heart emojis and clinking glass icons. She posted it with shaky resolve, tagging the restaurant, tagging Tanner, tagging Naomi. But not Judith. For a brief second, the image sat there, shimmering in curated perfection. Then her notifications started to fill with comments. Kwasa Caroline Duxa SC. Wait, where's your aunt? She was the one footing the bill, right? In Charleston Insider. Maze doesn't allow influencer tags anymore. Awkward timing. Bizwatch Oi43. Is this the same Tanner Rhodes from Lenpath? Emily froze. What's that supposed to mean? Tanner stiffened. Ignore it. But it was too late. The comments were stacking fast, links dropping beneath them, local finance accounts, gossip blogs, screenshots of the Ledger Weekly's article. Fintech darling Lendpath faces bankruptcy filing, investors cautioned. His name wasn't in the headline, but it was in the third paragraph. Tanner Rhodes, minor stakeholder. Naomi leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. Oh my God. Stop, he snapped. It's nothing. Emily turned to him, voice rising. Nothing? Tanner, they're tagging you. People are saying you were liquidating assets. Enough, he barked, the sound cracking through the table. The couple at the next booth turned to look. Naomi sank back into her chair, muttering something about needing air. And then, a soft ding. It came from Emily's phone, a new post sliding to the top of her feed. Judith Hayes official. A photo. Judith standing beside Ms. May in the restaurant's kitchen, both of them smiling, the purse resting on the counter between them like a relic. The caption? Legacy never fades. Emily stared, her thumb hovering over the screen. The picture was perfect. Elegant, unbothered, quietly powerful. Comments were pouring in already. Charleston locals, old family friends, even a few society accounts. Low country living. Two legends in one frame. Counter Historic SC. The Hayes family knows how to honor its roots. Chow Charleston. Crown. A masterclass in quiet class. Emily's mouth went dry. The juxtaposition was brutal, Judith's timeless composure against her own forced gloss. Her phone buzzed again, a text this time. Judith. You've been busy tonight. Emily's fingers hovered before she typed back. What are you doing? The reply came seconds later. Judith. Cleaning up. No emojis, no punctuation, just 2 words that landed like a verdict. Emily's pulse hammered as she looked toward the door where Judith and Ms. May were still standing, their silhouettes framed by the restaurant's soft light. Outside, the rain started again. Slow, steady, inevitable. Naomi's phone buzzed with another notification. Her PR manager's name flashed across the screen. Then, your brand account access has been restricted due to reputation risk. Tanner swore under his breath. Emily just stared at Judith's picture again, the one the whole city was now sharing. The caption glowed on the screen. Simple, final, impossible to ignore. Legacy never fades. Morning light spilled through the mullioned windows of Judith's study, the kind of old Charleston morning that made even the dust look dignified. The walls were lined with oak shelves, filled not with novels or heirlooms but with ledgers, her father's handwriting still visible on the oldest spines. At the center of the room sat Clark Benton, her estate advisor, in a dark pinstripe suit and his usual air of quiet precision. Judith placed her coffee cup on a coaster, sliding a stack of documents across the desk. Let's move forward, she said. The trust revisions first. Clark adjusted his glasses, scanning the forms. You're sure about excluding your niece and her husband? That's quite final. Judith's eyes lingered on the window, where the garden beyond stirred gently in the wind. Finality has a purpose. They've already shown me what they value. And it isn't you, Clark murmured. She gave a faint smile. It isn't legacy. They've mistaken inheritance for entitlement. Clark nodded slowly. Then who should be added in their place? Judith's fingers tapped the arm of her chair thoughtfully. Ava. The goddaughter? Judith looked up, a light in her eyes that wasn't sentiment but conviction. She delivers meals to half this neighborhood without ever posting about it. She doesn't do it for praise. She does it because she remembers what gratitude feels like. Clark smiled faintly, a rare trait these days. Judith leaned back, her voice soft but firm. She delivers meals. Not mockery. Clark wrote the name Ava Lee into the designated line with deliberate care. The ink bled slightly on the paper, clean, permanent. By the time he left, the air in the room felt lighter, as if something had been cleared away. Judith stood at the window watching the city breathe below her, the carriages, the narrow streets, the same old oaks that had shaded her family's home for generations. Some roots, she thought, grow deeper in silence. Across town, that silence was cracking. Naomi sat at a cafe table, oversized sunglasses hiding the puffiness around her eyes. She was speaking to a local journalist she mistook for a friend. I mean, seriously, Naomi said, stirring her coffee with unnecessary force. That old purse? Probably stuffed with coupons and mints. Who even keeps something like that? The woman across from her smiled politely, recording every word on her phone under the table. Maybe it's sentimental, she offered. Naomi snorted. Please, she probably thinks it's vintage. Next thing you know, she'll be selling heritage chic handbags to tourists. But just behind them, a man in a dark blazer, an assistant from May's PR office, listened without pretending not to. Later that afternoon, in Ms. May's upstairs office above the restaurant, Judith flipped open a folder labeled Influencer Contracts. Her reading glasses rested low on her nose, the edges of her mouth curving in mild disbelief as she skimmed the documents. Each of Naomi's brand partnership deals, sponsored content, restaurant tags, PR collaborations, listed May's Dining Group as a required affiliation. A single clause, underlined by Ms. May herself, read, access to the brand's properties and events is contingent upon good standing partnership with the Hayes Foundation. Judith closed the folder, a smile ghosting across her face. Ms. May stood by the window, watching the rain begin again. Seems the girl's about to learn the cost of carelessness. Judith's eyes twinkled. Let's not call it cost. Let's call it accounting. Ms. May chuckled, the sound warm but edged. You ready to prune the guest list again? Judith picked up her pen, flipping through another list of names, sponsors, donors, socialites. She drew a slow, neat line through Naomi James and rested the pen beside it. Pruned, she said simply. Outside, the city pulsed with the faint rhythm of consequence. Naomi's phone buzzed that evening as she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying concealer to the stress swelling beneath her eyes. A new email notification slid across the top of her screen. From May's Restaurant Group. PR subject, partnership termination notice. Body. Effective immediately, all brand collaborations under the Hayes Foundation umbrella have been suspended pending review. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Her lipstick tube slipped from her fingers and clattered into the sink. Across town, Judith poured herself a glass of red wine, the same steady motion she'd made for years. She stood by the window, the purse resting beside her on the table, and watched the streetlights blink through the mist. Her phone vibrated, an alert from her private account. The trust's first deposit had gone through, 7 figures secured under Ava Lee's name. A smile, quiet, earned, unhurried, curved at her lips. Ms. May's voice echoed in her mind. You sure you're ready to stir things again? She whispered back to the empty room. Oh, I'm just getting started. Charleston's humidity had settled like silk over the city that week, the kind of warmth that made ambition feel heavier. For Emily Rhodes, that weight came in the form of a single envelope waiting in her office mailbox. She slid it open with her nail, expecting glossy invitations and embossed logos. The Charleston Women's Business Guild always sent theirs on thick cream stock. What she found instead was smaller, clipped, almost apologetic. Mrs. Rhodes, we regret to inform you that your membership renewal has been declined for the upcoming term. Thank you for your previous involvement, and we wish you continued success in your personal endeavors. Her breath caught. The letter didn't even bear a signature, just the Guild's embossed seal. She read it twice, then a third time, the words sinking in like ice through linen. Declined. No explanation, no courtesy call. She dropped into her chair, scrolling frantically through her phone. Her inbox, once a parade of RSVPs and partnership proposals, was quieter now. 2 unsubscribes, 1 regret to inform, and a ghosted thread from a luxury boutique she'd been promoting. When she opened Instagram, her feed was worse. Naomi's latest post sat pinned at the top. A bright photo of coffee and croissants. 12 likes in an hour. 12. Her follower count, once 6 digits strong, was falling in real time. Emily clicked open her friend's profile. No hashtags, no reach. The algorithm had swallowed her whole. Naomi's newest story was a mirror video, mascara smudged, voice shaking. Shadow banned. They actually shadow banned me. I can't tag half my clients. It's like I don't exist. Emily almost typed a reply but stopped. She knew exactly why. Somewhere, in a quiet office above Broad Street, Judith and Ms. May had seen to that. Across town, in the paneled stillness of the Charleston First Trust Bank, Tanner Rhodes sat in a glass-walled office trying to keep his composure. The loan officer, a man half his age but twice his confidence, tapped at a keyboard before sighing softly. "I'm afraid your application for a bridge loan can't be approved at this time, Mr. Rhodes." Tanner clenched his jaw. "We have collateral. I sent over the financials." "Yes, sir, but with Lenpath's holdings under review, your equity isn't considered liquid. It's, well, unstable." Tanner's hands tightened around the arms of the chair. "You don't understand. This is a temporary dip. Once the market stabilizes." The banker's voice softened, almost pitying. "We understand, but the board's guidelines are firm. You might want to explore private lending." Private lending? Code for desperation. Tanner stood, shaking the man's hand like it burned him. "Thank you for your time," he said, the words tasting like rust. That same afternoon, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Charleston's historic library hall. Inside, a quiet buzz filled the space. A mentorship event, Legacy Women Forward, funded by none other than the Hayes Foundation. Judith moved through the crowd gracefully, her presence understated but magnetic. Ava stood at the podium in soft pink linen, speaking with an ease that came not from polish but from purpose. "My godmother," Ava said, glancing toward Judith, "taught me that wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by what outlasts you." And generosity, when done quietly, echoes the loudest. Applause rippled through the audience. City officials, philanthropists, women who'd once whispered about Judith's modest purse now hanging on her every gesture. Near the back of the room, Emily stood alone. She hadn't been invited. She'd seen the event flyer at her favorite cafe that morning, Judith Hayes Foundation Mentorship Luncheon, and the names printed in small serif font along the bottom. Ava Lee, Ms. May Franklin, Clark Benton, Judith Hayes. Her own name was nowhere on it. She'd dressed up anyway, told herself she'd drop by to show support, maybe network her way back into relevance. But standing there now, clutching her tote like armor, she could feel the distance between them. When the applause ended, Judith turned and saw her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the crowd. Emily straightened, her lips parting as if to speak. Judith's face softened into a polite, unreadable smile, the kind reserved for strangers or people you've already forgiven without forgetting. She inclined her head once, almost imperceptibly, and walked past. Emily's throat tightened. She turned toward the exit, heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor, the sound sharp enough to draw glances she couldn't bear. Outside, Charleston shimmered under the late sun, magnolias blooming, the air thick with jasmine and judgment. Emily stepped into the light, blinking back whatever pride she had left, her phone buzzing in her bag. A notification banner slid across the screen. Breaking. Hayes Foundation to acquire historic Broad Street property for women-led business hub. Her reflection glared back at her from the glass door. And through that reflection, across the street, she saw Judith walking calmly with Ava. The younger woman carrying the same weathered purse now, swinging lightly at her side. Emily's breath caught. For a moment she thought about calling out, about apologizing, but Judith never looked back. She just lifted her hand in a graceful, absent wave, the kind that closed a chapter without saying a word. It was a gray morning when Emily stood outside Judith's house, the kind of Charleston morning that carried salt in the air and the hum of distant thunder. The Hayes home loomed quietly behind its wrought iron gate, ivy climbing its columns like time reclaiming its due. Emily hesitated before pressing the brass bell. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Perfect hair, neutral dress, eyes betraying the panic she'd spent all week disguising. Inside, the sound of slow footsteps. Then the door opened. Judith stood there in her cardigan and soft leather slippers, the same calm that had unsettled Emily since childhood. "Emily," she said, her tone even, "you look tired." I just wanted to talk," Emily said quickly. "To clear the air, maybe?" Judith's expression didn't change. After a measured pause, she stepped aside. "All right, come in." The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish and magnolia blooms from the vase near the stairwell. Every surface gleamed, every frame perfectly aligned. Not grand, but deliberate. A home kept by someone who still believed order could heal what people broke. Emily perched on the edge of the sitting room sofa, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. Judith moved unhurriedly, setting a tray of tea between them. "Sugar?" Judith asked. "No, thank you." Emily took a shaky breath. "Look, I know things have been weird. The restaurant, the posts, the guild stuff. It all spiraled. People talk, and perception can be cruel. But I just think maybe there's been some misunderstanding." Judith poured the tea. The silver spoon clinked once, sharply, before the silence swallowed it again. "Perception," Judith repeated, her tone mild. "That's a word you've always liked." Emily flushed. "I didn't mean it like that, I know things looked bad. But Tanner's had a rough time. We both have. And maybe I said things that came off wrong. You know how social media magnifies everything." Judith's eyes stayed on her, unreadable. Emily pushed on, her voice gaining speed. "And the photo? I didn't even know he took it until later. It was supposed to be a joke. Just something dumb for a story, not disrespect." Judith set her cup down. "A joke," she said softly. Emily nodded quickly. "Exactly. A stupid joke. We never meant to hurt you. You've always been the classy one in the family, the stable one. I just wish people didn't twist things to make us look like villains." The air between them went still, heavy with the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. Judith rose and crossed to the sideboard, her back to Emily. "It's interesting," she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "You call it perception. I call it truth in costume." Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" Judith turned, a single sheet of paper in her hand. She walked back, slow, measured, and placed it on the table between them. It was a photograph. Tanner's photograph. The one he'd snapped under the table weeks ago. The old purse, dimly lit, the faint glint of the black card peeking from its zipper. But this version had been printed with a caption in clean serif font across the bottom. The things they mock most often hold what they need most. Emily stared at it, her mouth parting. Where did you? Judith's voice was soft, deliberate. Ms. May has a very thorough incident log policy. Every file she keeps is time-stamped and cross-checked. That photo was archived with the restaurant's security feed. I thought you might want a copy. A keepsake of sorts. Emily's pulse hammered. You kept it? I preserve history, Judith said, lowering herself back into her chair. That's what archivists do. Emily swallowed hard, color rising up her throat. You're trying to humiliate us. No, Judith said gently. I'm reminding you what happens when you confuse dignity with display. Emily's composure cracked. You think you're better than me, don't you? Judith tilted her head, the faintest smile ghosting her lips. No, dear. I just never forgot where I came from. You tried to build a life out of mirrors. I preferred windows. The words hit harder for their calmness. Emily looked down at the photo again, the printed caption cutting through her like static. Finally, she stood. I shouldn't have come. Judith's eyes followed her without pity. Probably not. Emily gathered her bag, her movements sharp, brittle. At the doorway she stopped, voice trembling. You've ruined everything for us. Judith didn't flinch. No, she said softly. You did that the moment you forgot gratitude. Emily turned away before the tears could rise. The front door closed behind her with a muted click. For a long time, Judith stood there, the morning light falling over the photo still resting on the table. She picked it up, slipped it back into her purse, and closed the clasp with that familiar, final sound. Outside, Emily stumbled down the steps toward her car, her phone buzzing in her hand. A notification flashed across the screen. Breaking. LendPath executives subpoenaed for financial misconduct investigation. She froze, staring at Tanner's name in print again. Back inside, Judith opened her phone, typed a short message, and hit send. To Clark Benton. Message, let the record show. The visit didn't change a thing. It started with whispers, as most Charleston stories do. By the time the azaleas bloomed along Meeting Street, the dinner had become something of a parable in local circles. It floated through private garden parties, charity luncheons, whispered over champagne flutes and soft laughter. No one could agree on every detail, but the essentials never changed. A woman with an old purse, 3 ungrateful guests, and a bill that rewrote reputations. The legend spread quietly, carried by servers, board members, and those who prided themselves on knowing who really owned what in the city. Did you hear? Someone would murmur. She didn't just pay the tab, she owned the place. Old Charleston money, another would add reverently, the kind that doesn't flash. It just waits. And Judith Hayes, true to her nature, neither confirmed nor denied a word. A month later, her photo, the same one with Ms. May and that weathered purse, hung framed inside the restaurant's front hall. The brass plaque beneath it read simply, Legacy never fades. Guests paused to look when they entered, some smiling, some lowering their voices. The ones who knew whispered her name like an heirloom. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi James was gone, digitally speaking. Her Instagram vanished overnight. Every post, every caption, every trace of curated perfection erased in a single click. Rumors followed, of course, that she'd moved to Atlanta, that she was rebranding. that her last brand sponsor had quietly dissolved their contract after certain PR complications. In truth, she was still in Charleston, just quieter now, her phone camera tucked away, her influence traded for anonymity. For Emily, silence came slower and meaner. Her consulting firm, Rhodes Image and Cohen, had been fragile to begin with, built on connections now turning brittle. 3 clients canceled within the same week. 2 stopped returning calls altogether. The final email arrived late one evening as she sat in her office under flickering fluorescent light. Dear Mrs. Rhodes, after careful consideration, we've decided to move in a different direction with our brand strategy. We wish you all the best. No signature, no explanation. Just a door closing without a sound. Emily leaned back in her chair, staring at the framed Women of Influence 2023 award on her wall. The gold lettering glinted in the dim light like mockery. She pressed her palms over her face and let the silence swallow her. Tanner, ever the pragmatist, adjusted faster. Or tried to. His new suit was cheaper, his smile a little tighter, but his handshake remained the same. He sold his watch first, the one he used to polish before every meeting, engraved on the back with "For every win, remember who helped you start." The pawnshop clerk offered half of what it was worth. Tanner didn't argue. When he left, the sound of the doorbell behind him seemed louder than usual, and through it all, Judith moved quietly, gracefully, like a woman whose balance had finally been restored. The foundation she co-chaired with Miss Sepfoy Anne May hosted a new event that spring, the Hayes Family Scholarship for Historical Preservation, honoring her late father's years of work preserving Charleston's archives. The ceremony was small and elegant, held under the wide oaks behind the library. Ava gave the opening remarks. Judith stood near the back, her purse looped over her arm, smiling faintly as the young scholars spoke about legacies, about preserving stories that would otherwise fade. When she was introduced, she didn't make a speech. She just stepped up to the podium, looked out over the crowd, and said, "History isn't about who remembers your name, it's about who remembers your integrity." Applause rolled through the courtyard, real, respectful, earned. That night, after the guests had gone and the lanterns were dimmed, Judith lingered by the reflecting pool. The purse rested on the bench beside her, its leather soft from years of touch. Clark Benton approached, his shoes crunching softly on the gravel. "It's strange," he said. "For a night that began with humiliation, you've built something unbreakable out of it." Judith smiled, eyes on the water. "Humiliation's only temporary. Dignity doesn't expire." Clark nodded, glancing toward the purse. "You ever going to retire that thing?" She chuckled quietly. "Not while it still has work to do." Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. A news alert. She didn't check it. Not yet. But when she did later that night, it would show Tanner's name again, buried deep in a report about asset seizures tied to LendPath's collapse. For now, she just sat beneath the trees, the reflection of the purse glimmering on the water like a relic of patience rewarded. Spring in Charleston had a way of making endings look like beginnings. The air was soft, the wisteria heavy with bloom, and in Judith Hayes's study, the late light slanted across her desk in threads of gold and dust. Ava sat across from her, shoulders trembling as she tried to keep her composure. The legal documents in front of her were neatly arranged, each one bearing Judith's careful handwriting and Clark Benton's embossed seal. Clark stood by the window, giving them privacy but bearing witness all the same. "I can't." Ava's voice cracked. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, then tried again. "I don't understand why me." Judith's tone was gentle but unwavering. "Because you showed up when they didn't." Ava blinked through her tears, the words sinking in like sunlight through water. She reached across the desk, resting her hand on Judith's for just a moment, hesitant, reverent. I don't deserve this. Judith smiled softly. That's exactly why you do. Clark turned, clearing his throat. Everything is signed. The foundation holdings are secure, the scholarship continues in perpetuity, and Ava will have full discretionary oversight. Judith nodded. Good. The air felt still, not solemn, but settled. Ava wiped her cheeks, smiling shakily. You really think I can handle all this? Judith gave her a knowing look. You already have. You just didn't notice. They both laughed, quietly, a little broken, but full of something real. That night across town, Tanner Rhodes sat in the dark glow of his laptop, scrolling through old emails with mounting desperation. His office was half empty now. The framed motivational quotes that once hung proudly behind his desk leaned against the wall like forgotten promises. Finally, he opened a new message. Subject: Let's talk business. Body: Judith. We've both been through enough. There's opportunity here for reconciliation and partnership. Let's rebuild, together. He read it twice before hitting send, his thumb hesitating for only a moment. At precisely 7:12 the next morning, Clark Benton's phone chimed. He opened the message, frowned, and without hesitation dragged it into the spam folder. One click. Gone. Then he opened another email. This one from Judith, time-stamped 5 minutes earlier. If Tanner contacts you again, forward nothing. Closure is a boundary, not a negotiation. Clark smiled faintly. Understood. Later that week, Judith arrived at May's with a bouquet of pale gardenias wrapped in paper, flowers that carried the quiet sweetness of restraint. Ms. May was already waiting at her favorite table by the window, a cup of chicory coffee steaming between her palms. She looked up as Judith approached. You always bring flowers when something's finished, she said, voice warm and teasing. Judith set the bouquet down, taking the seat across from her. Not finished, she said. Settled. Ms. May leaned back. That's your word for peace, isn't it? Judith smiled. It's the only kind that lasts. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the light shift through the old restaurant's wide windows. Outside, Charleston moved on, the city that had seen them both through youth, loss, and vindication. Ms. May sipped her coffee. So it's done then? The will, the trust, the rest of it? Judith nodded. Clark finalized everything. Ava's name is where it belongs. The others... She trailed off, glancing toward the street, where carriages rattled over cobblestones. They'll learn what happens when you mistake invitation for inheritance. Ms. May's eyes softened. And how do you feel? Judith paused, her gaze turning toward the bouquet. White petals, perfect and temporary. Free, she said finally. And a little sad. But even pruning hurts less when you know the garden will grow back stronger. Ms. May reached across the table, her hand resting over Judith's. Your father would have been proud. You did what most people can't. Protected what matters without bitterness. Judith's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. He taught me that legacy isn't who carries your name. It's who carries your values. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering the scent of the flowers through the restaurant. The same scent lingered on Judith's hands as she stood to leave, purse tucked under her arm. At the door, Ms. May called after her. You know, every time I see that purse, I think of all the things it's carried. Receipts, keys, power, and grace. Judith turned, her smile faint but sure. It's carried everything I refuse to let go of. Then she stepped out into the Charleston afternoon, the sunlight warm against her face, the sound of the sea just audible in the distance. Her phone buzzed once, a text from Clark. Clark. Ledger just released the estate announcement. Public reactions, intense. Judith read it, slipped the phone back into her purse and walked on without breaking stride. The air over Broad Street shimmered that evening, touched with the glow of string lights and soft jazz filtering out through open doors. Charleston had gathered, not for one of its usual charity galas or heritage dinners, but for something newer, rarer. The brass plaque beside the door read simply, "Her Table," a community kitchen by Judith Hayes. Inside, the walls were painted a warm ivory, hung with old photographs of Charleston women, teachers, bakers, restaurateurs, quiet pioneers whose names had never reached the city's plaques or papers. The long reclaimed wood tables gleamed under low lights, set not with crystal and silver but with pottery, handmade by local artists. And at the center of it all stood Judith. She wore navy silk, understated and timeless, the purse slung casually over her arm as if it belonged to the space itself. She didn't hover for attention, she circulated, greeting people by first name, former waitresses, community leaders, scholarship recipients. The laughter that rippled around her wasn't society laughter. It was something warmer, rooted. On stage, Ava tapped the microphone gently. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice bright but steady. "When Ms. Hayes first told me her idea for her table, she said something I'll never forget. The best meals aren't about status. They're about belonging." Soft applause filled the room. Ava smiled toward Judith, her eyes shining. This place exists because of her belief that dignity should always have a seat, and that women, when given a chance to lead, feed more than themselves. Tonight, every investor, every chef, every hand that built this kitchen is a woman who decided she was tired of waiting for an invitation. The crowd rose in a wave of cheers, the kind that came from recognition, not spectacle. Judith's eyes softened. For the first time in years, she let herself look proud. Across town, Emily Rhodes sat in her kitchen, the glow of her phone screen washing over her face. She hadn't meant to open Instagram, not after weeks of avoiding it, but the notification had been impossible to resist. Her Table Charleston, tagged in 212 posts. The photos were everywhere. Judith smiling beside Ava, Ms. May holding a champagne flute, rows of women toasting under the glow of lanterns. Even the local press had picked it up. Charleston's most anticipated restaurant opens with mission of empowerment. Emily scrolled faster. She found one photo of the entrance, another of the long table set with candles and rosemary sprigs, and then, finally, one of Judith, laughing mid-sentence beside a woman in a chef's coat. No tags, no mention of her family, not even a nod to the name Hayes Rhodes she'd once paraded through social columns. The screen blurred for a second before she realized her vision had gone glassy. She blinked hard, then locked the phone. In the hallway, Tanner's voice echoed faintly from the next room. "I just need to talk to the attorney again, Em. There's a chance." "No, there's not," she said, sharper than intended. He appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled, dark circles under his eyes. "It's temporary. Bankruptcy's just protection. We'll recover." Emily laughed, brittle and low. "You've been saying that for months." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The silence between them was full. Years of image and ambition now rotted through. She turned away. "You should sleep," she murmured. "Tomorrow you'll have to explain to the bank why your car isn't parked out front anymore." He didn't answer. When she finally went back to her phone, the feed had updated again. Ava had just posted a photo of the event, the purse resting on the table between her and Judith. The caption reading, "We built a table no one can buy their way into." Emily scrolled to the comments, hundreds of them. Words like inspiring, historic, homegrown leadership. She stared until the letters blurred, until the knot in her throat was too heavy to swallow. At that same hour, Naomi James stood at the Charleston bus terminal with a single suitcase and her phone turned off. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, reflections bending in puddles. A local reporter had caught her the week before, asking about the Hayes dinner and her relationship with Ms. May's brand partners. She'd smiled through it, but she'd known it was time. A reset, she told herself. Everyone needs one. As the night bus pulled up, she took one last look at the skyline, the steeples, the soft amber of old windows, the whispers of the circles she used to belong to. Then she stepped aboard without looking back. Inside her table, dessert was being served. Lemon tart with lavender whipped cream. Judith took a small bite, closed her eyes, and let the laughter around her fill the space that used to ache. Clark leaned over. "You realize you've just started something that's going to outlive all of us." Judith smiled. "That's the plan." The photographer from the Ledger approached then, asking for a quick portrait. Judith nodded, resting a hand on the purse at her side. When the flash went off, she felt the moment settle. A chapter sealed not in vengeance but in restoration. Across the city, in a dark kitchen lit only by the glow of a phone screen, Emily refreshed her feed again. Nothing changed, still no tags, still no mention. For the first time, she whispered aloud, "She really erased us." From somewhere deep inside her table, the sound of applause echoed faintly through Charleston's night. Applause she could hear, but would never belong to again. The morning air inside Judith's study felt different now. Not heavy, not final, but complete. Sunlight slid in narrow ribbons through the lace curtains, falling across the desk where the last of her estate papers lay. Clark Benton stood beside her, reading glasses perched on his nose, the quiet hum of his pen scratching as he signed the final page. "And that's the last of it," he said, voice steady. "Everything's transferred. The trust, the foundation, the restaurant holdings." Judith's eyes followed the ink as it dried. "And there's no room left for misinterpretation?" "None," Clark assured her. "Your goddaughter is officially the executor, power of attorney included. Ava Lee now carries the Hayes legacy, legally, financially, and publicly." Judith nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Then that's that." Clark hesitated, softening. "You're certain you don't want to leave anything? Even a courtesy line to family?" Judith looked up at him, her gaze calm but resolute. "A will should reward gratitude, not blood." He inclined his head. "Understood." The room was silent but alive with the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, the same one that had measured her father's patience, and now, her peace. Judith stood, walking to the window. Outside, the magnolias had bloomed early this year, wide ivory petals cupping sunlight like memory. "When my father died," she said quietly, "I remember thinking legacy meant what you passed down. Took me most of a lifetime to realize it's also what you refuse to." Clark smiled faintly. He'd have liked that. "I know," Judith said. "He taught me not to mistake inheritance for worth." She signed the last document, the pen gliding with the calm certainty of closure. A week later, in the polished halls of the Charleston Museum of History, a new exhibit opened under a simple title, "The Measure of Wealth: Legacies That Last." Among the portraits and artifacts, faded letters, jewelry, ledgers from old trading houses, sat a glass case. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a weathered brown leather purse. Its brass clasp caught the gallery light like an echo of fire. A small plaque beneath it read, "The Purse of Judith Hayes, 1960. Carried through every major business venture, philanthropic act, and personal milestone of her life. Donated to the Charleston Museum by Ms. Hayes herself, in honor of the belief that true wealth is quiet, consistent, and kind." Visitors lingered before it, whispering. Some recognized the story, some only knew the legend. At the back of the room, Judith stood beside Ms. May and Ava, hands clasped loosely. "It looks smaller in the case," Ava murmured. "It carried enough," Judith said softly. "Now it can rest." Ms. May smiled, her silver hair catching the light. "Funny how money talks," she said, the drawl in her tone gentle but knowing. Judith's eyes remained on the purse, and class whispers. Ms. May tilted her head. "So what does silence do?" Judith smiled faintly. "It echoes?" They stood there for a long while, watching the quiet crowd move through the exhibit. Young couples, tourists, even a few reporters scribbling notes for columns that would praise the elegance of restraint. Across town, Emily Rhodes sat at her dining table surrounded by cluttered papers, her laptop open to a half-written email. To societyeCharlestonpress.com. Subject: A different side to the Hayes story. She typed furiously. About family, about betrayal, about how legacy wasn't as noble as the city believed. She attached screenshots, old photos, records Tanner had pieced together in his spiral of research and regret. When she hit send, she waited, refreshing her inbox every few minutes. No reply. Hours passed. The only new messages were automated. "Thank you for your submission." Then, one by one, rejection notes trickled in, polite, distant, final. By sunset, she realized the story was never going to print. In the eyes of Charleston, Judith's narrative was already written, sealed, admired, untouchable. Emily shut the laptop with shaking hands. Outside, the sound of a church bell carried faintly through the open window, tolling like an old truth she'd never wanted to face. She whispered to no one. She won. At the museum, closing hour neared. The curator dimmed the lights, leaving only a soft glow on the purse display. Judith lingered a moment longer, hand resting lightly on the glass. "You're sure about giving it up?" Ava asked beside her. Judith's eyes softened. "It doesn't need me anymore." She turned toward the doorway, her reflection fading from the glass until the purse was the only thing left in the light. Small, still, eternal. As she stepped into the cool Charleston night, Ms. May looped her arm through hers. "You did it, Judith. You rewrote what legacy means." Judith smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I just reminded them." The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as Charleston's sunlight began to bleed through the office blinds at the Hayes Foundation for Women. Ava sat at her desk, calm and deliberate, a mug of chamomile cooling beside her keyboard. The subject line read, "Application, Emily Rhodes, Community Outreach Director Position." Ava opened it slowly. Attached was a formal letter, neatly formatted, overflowing with the sort of polished desperation that hid behind professionalism. Emily had listed her experience in social media branding and lifestyle consulting, her work fostering empowerment through digital spaces, and, near the bottom, a subtle plea. "I believe I could bring renewed visibility to the Foundation's mission, bridging modern platforms with your historic values." Ava read the line twice, then a third time. Her hand didn't shake when she reached for her pen. She made a single note in the margin of the printed copy. Visibility, authenticity. An hour later, she composed her reply. Subject: Application. Community Outreach Director. Dear Mrs. Rhodes, thank you for your interest in the position. After careful review, we've decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience more closely aligns with our mission. We wish you the best in your continued endeavors. Sincerely, Ava Lee, Executive Director, Hayes Foundation. She hovered over send, then added one last line, gentle but final. P.S. Ms. Hayes often said legacy belongs to those who show up when it isn't convenient. I thought you'd appreciate the reminder. Then she hit send. Across town, Emily's laptop chimed. She clicked the notification and read the message in silence. Her hand found the edge of the table, gripping it to stay steady. Ava Lee. Of course. The goddaughter. The replacement. The one Judith had chosen. She read the line again. Legacy belongs to those who show up when it isn't convenient. The words stung because they were true. She shut the laptop. For the first time in months, she didn't cry. Just sat there in the stillness, surrounded by unopened bills and the sound of the ceiling fan that never stopped wobbling. Naomi James's name was disappearing too, but not from inboxes, from the city's donor lists. It began quietly. The annual Spring Society luncheon sent out a glossy brochure, and for the first time in 5 years, Naomi's name wasn't among the silver patrons. The same happened with the Preservation League. Then, the Children's Arts Gala. When she called to inquire, the assistant on the other end was polite but clipped. "We're streamlining sponsorship tiers this year, Ms. James, focusing on long-term commitments." "Long-term?" Naomi repeated. "I've donated for 7 years." The silence that followed was short, suffocating, and final. "Yes, ma'am," the voice said gently, "and we thank you for that." By summer, her invitations stopped arriving entirely. Meanwhile, at a quiet corner cafe downtown, Judith Hayes sat beneath a striped awning with 3 young entrepreneurs, women she'd helped mentor through her table's small business initiative. The midday sun dappled their notebooks and lattes, laughter floating between them like conversation among equals. Judith listened more than she spoke, interjecting only when a thought truly mattered. Her purse, now slightly worn at the seams, rested on the chair beside her, as always. "So when the investors pulled out," said one of the young women, "I almost gave up. But then I remembered what you told me at the grant review." Judith smiled. "Which part?" "That when people underestimate you, they're really underestimating their own imagination." Judith laughed softly, shaking her head. "That sounds like something Ms. May would say." "It's true, though," the woman insisted. "I used it in my pitch, and I got funding." Judith reached for her purse, unzipping the familiar compartment where her checkbook lived, the same worn leather pocket that had once held secrets, receipts, and cards that made men like Tanner Rhodes sweat. "Then let me add a little something to help that imagination grow," she said, writing neatly. "Consider it seed money." The woman's eyes widened. "Ms. Hayes, you don't have to—" "I know," Judith said, tucking the check inside an envelope. "That's why it matters." As they rose to leave, a young girl at the next table, maybe 10, freckles bright under the sunlight, pointed shyly. "I like your purse," she said. "It's old, but it's beautiful." Judith paused, smiling down at her. "It gets better with time," she said softly. "Most things worth keeping do." The girl grinned, and Judith brushed her fingers over the worn strap once more before turning to go. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the narrow streets toward her table, the scent of baked bread and salt air mingled around her. She could hear laughter from the restaurant courtyard, Ava's voice somewhere among them, bright and sure. Judith smiled. When she reached the corner, Clark was waiting by the lamppost with a folded newspaper in his hand. "You'll like this," he said, passing it over. The headline read, "From Purse to Powerhouse, the woman who changed Charleston's definition of wealth." Judith skimmed it, chuckling softly. "They always catch up late." Clark shrugged, smiling. "Legends take time to print." Judith tucked the paper into her purse beside her checkbook, the leather whispering as it closed. Charleston was slow that afternoon, the kind of slow that only came after a storm and before another. The sky was pale, the streets slick with rain that had already decided it had said enough. Inside her table, the lunch rush had thinned to a soft hum of plates and the low hiss of the espresso machine. Judith Hayes walked through the dining room, her steps unhurried, the click of her heels muffled against the old pine floorboards. The space had changed since that first dinner at May's. brighter, fuller, more alive, but it carried the same kind of grace, unforced, deliberate, rooted in quiet respect. Ava stood at the front, reviewing the reservation list, her hair pulled into a neat twist. She glanced up as Judith approached. "Everything's running smoothly. We're booked solid through next week." Judith smiled. "That's good to hear." "You've done well." Ava's eyes softened. "You built the blueprint." Judith's gaze swept across the room, the sunlight spilling over copper fixtures, the soft laughter from the patio, the smell of rosemary and roasted bread drifting from the kitchen. It felt less like success and more like arrival. Ryan, the same waiter who'd once stood nervously at her side years ago during that dinner, approached carrying something wrapped in parchment and tied with a soft ribbon. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his tone reverent but easy now. "Ms. May thought you might like to see this." He handed her the frame. Judith untied the ribbon and lifted the cover. Inside, preserved under glass, was the original dinner receipt, the one from that night. The handwriting on the line for cardholder was hers. Above the total, in calligraphed ink, the restaurant had titled the piece, "Paid in Full." For a long moment, Judith said nothing. Her eyes traced the numbers, the signature, the faint wine stain in the corner she hadn't noticed that night. History, framed and forgiven. "Where are you planning to hang it?" she asked quietly. "In the private dining room," Ryan said. "Ms. May thought it belonged there. A reminder of how this place started." Judith smiled faintly. "She's right." As Ryan walked away, Ava stepped closer. "Do you ever think about them?" Judith's hand lingered on the frame. "Sometimes, but not with anger." She turned toward the window, watching the street outside. The light caught in her eyes the way it always had. Soft, sure, knowing. Outside, the city carried on. And across the street, paused just past the old oak that shaded the sidewalk, stood Emily Rhodes. She looked smaller than Judith remembered. Hair pulled back, shoulders tucked in against the wind. Her gaze lifted briefly toward the sign over the door. Her table. The letters shimmered faintly in gold. For a heartbeat, Judith thought Emily might step inside. But she didn't. Emily's eyes fell to the ground and she turned away, walking slowly down the street until the crowd swallowed her. Judith exhaled, not with relief, not with triumph, but something gentler. Acceptance. Ava placed a hand on her arm. "She came by last week," she said softly. "Didn't come in then either." Judith nodded. "Some debts can't be repaid in money, only in time." They walked together into the private dining room, where the framed receipt now hung on the wall. Below it, the plaque read, "In honor of grace under cruelty," and the strength of a woman who knew her worth long before anyone else did. Judith touched the frame lightly. "It's strange," she said. "It was never really about the dinner." Ava smiled. "I know." Ryan appeared again, this time with a porcelain teacup. "Chamomile, Ms. Hayes, just how you like it." Judith took it, her fingers brushing the warm ceramic. She sat at the corner table, the same spot she had once been mocked for occupying, and let the steam curl against her face. The purse sat beside her, its familiar leather softened by years, the zipper catching the light. She opened it slowly, reaching inside with practiced ease, and pulled out her checkbook. The pages were nearly filled. Grants, donations, quiet acts of generosity that never made the papers but built foundations nonetheless. A young hostess passed by and hesitated. "Ms. Hayes?" Judith looked up. The girl smiled shyly. "That's a beautiful purse." Judith's smile reached her eyes. "It gets better with time," she said. Then she set her tea down, tucked the checkbook neatly into the same old zip pocket, and glanced once more at the framed receipt. Her quiet, perfect full circle. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the window pane. Judith lifted her cup, savoring the calm she'd built piece by piece, lesson by lesson. And with a small, knowing smile, she whispered to herself, "They mocked my old purse. It bought the dinner they couldn't afford." The clock above the bar ticked once, clean and final. The bill, at last, had been paid.